I didn't want to say this out loud because once you hear it, it has a way of settling into your body, whether you invite it or not. But after more than 30 years of watching women your age sit across from me, I can't stay quiet anymore. By the time most women over 60 say, "I don't feel like myself," something inside them has already changed, not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly, and almost always without pain. That's what makes it dangerous to misunderstand. I've seen women walk into emergency rooms smiling politely while their bodies were already compensating in ways they didn't recognize. I've seen women in clinics insist they were fine while their posture told a different story, while their eyes lingered just a moment too long before answering simple questions. I've learned to listen to the pauses as much as the words, because the body speaks long before fear finds language. Most women don't come in saying something is wrong. They come in saying something is different. They say they're more tired, but not sleepy. They say their balance feels slightly off, but not enough to mention to friends. They say their thoughts don't flow the way they used to, or that their heart feels present in a way it never did before. They say they feel thinner inside, as if their margin for stress has narrowed. And almost always they say it with an apology, as if noticing their own body were an inconvenience. What they are really saying is that the rules have changed, and no one told them. Medicine has not done a good job explaining this stage of life. We are trained to look for disease, not transition. So when tests are acceptable and scans don't alarm us, women are sent home with reassurance instead of understanding. They are told nothing is wrong, when what they needed to hear was that something is different, and different requires a new way of listening. I remember a woman named Kathleen, 62, who sat very still when she spoke, hands folded, voice careful. She told me she felt unsettled in her own body, not anxious exactly, just unmoored. She said her energy came and went unpredictably, that some mornings she woke clear and capable, and other days she felt as if she were moving through water. She had been told this was normal aging and that she should be grateful she wasn't sick. Kathleen didn't feel grateful. She felt confused. What was happening to her was not random. It was not weakness. It was not a failure to cope. Her nervous system was adapting to the loss of estrogen, a hormone that had quietly moderated her stress response, her vascular tone, her sleep rhythms, and her brain chemistry for decades. Without it, her internal systems were renegotiating how to work together. That renegotiation doesn't show up on routine tests. It shows up in lived experience. When I explained this to her, she leaned back slightly and let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. She said, "So this isn't in my head." And I told her the truth. It was in her body. And her body was doing exactly what bodies do when they are adapting to a new internal reality. This is what I wish more women were told earlier. After 60, the body becomes less forgiving, but more honest. It no longer hides imbalance for the sake of momentum. It stops smoothing over stress quietly. It begins to ask for attention in subtler ways, and when those ways are ignored, it asks louder. That is not betrayal. That is intelligence. I've watched women ignore those early signals because they didn't want to seem dramatic. They pushed through fatigue, dismissed dizziness, normalized palpitations, laughed off memory lapses. They told themselves everyone their age felt this way, and some of that is true. But common does not mean trivial, and normal does not mean ignorable. There was a woman named Ruth, 70, who came to me terrified she was losing her mind. She was articulate, sharp, used to thinking quickly. Now she found herself searching for words mid-sentence. Names escaped her. She became hyper-aware of every pause. She had watched enough stories online to convince herself this was the beginning of the end. What Ruth was experiencing was a change in cognitive retrieval, not a loss of intelligence. After menopause, the female brain undergoes measurable shifts in how it uses energy and how different regions communicate. Retrieval speed slows. Storage remains largely intact. Stress and poor sleep amplify the delay. Fear magnifies it further. Ruth's mind wasn't disappearing. It was working under new conditions. But no one had explained that to her. She had been given fear without framework. This is where so many women get hurt. They are handed fragments of truth without context. And those fragments are sharp. They cut trust. They turn curiosity into panic. They make women feel as if something terrible is happening just out of view. I am not here to tell you that nothing is happening. That would be a lie. Something is happening. But it is not chaos, it is pattern. After 60, Cardiovascular regulation changes. Blood vessels gradually lose elasticity. The heart becomes more sensitive to stress and emotional cues. Many women notice sensations they never felt before. A flutter, a heaviness, a sudden awareness of their heartbeat. These sensations can be frightening when no one has explained why they occur. I've seen women stop walking, stop traveling, stop sleeping well because they were taught to fear these sensations rather than understand them. I've also seen women ignore real warning signs because they were told everything was just aging. Both extremes are dangerous. There was a woman named Lorraine, 74, who came to see me because she was afraid to be alone at night. Her heart would sometimes race when she lay down. She had been told anxiety was the cause. She had been told heart disease was unlikely. She lived in the space between those statements, terrified and unsupported. What she needed was neither dismissal nor alarm. She needed context. Her autonomic nervous system had shifted. Her heart was responding normally to stress in a body that had become more sensitive. We evaluated her carefully. We ruled out what needed ruling out, and then we talked about what was happening and why. Her fear eased before her symptoms did. Understanding is stabilizing. I want to be clear about something that often goes unsaid. Many women have been surviving on competence for decades. They learned to override discomfort because people depended on them. They learned to keep going because stopping was not an option. After 60, that strategy stops working, not because they are weaker, but because the body is no longer willing to be overridden. This is often misinterpreted as decline. It is not. It is a shift in priorities. The immune system changes. Inflammation becomes easier to trigger and harder to quiet. Sleep becomes lighter. Recovery takes longer. These are not punishments. They are signals that the body requires a different kind of care now. When women respond with the same force they used at 40, they exhaust themselves. When they respond with attention, they often stabilize. I have seen women blame themselves mercilessly for these changes. They say they should be tougher, more disciplined, less sensitive. They do not realize that sensitivity at this stage is feedback, not fragility. There is a moment I have witnessed hundreds of times. A woman stops talking mid-thought. She looks down briefly. Then she looks up and says very quietly, "This explains so much." That moment matters. Because recognition replaces fear. The body stops being a mystery and becomes a system again. If you are over 60 and feel off, I want you to understand that this feeling did not appear overnight. It has been building quietly, predictably, in a body that is adapting to a new internal landscape. And once you see that clearly, once you understand that this is biology rather than failure, you can't unsee it. You can't unsee it, and that awareness changes how you listen to yourself from that moment forward. This is where many women realize that what frightened them was not the change itself, but the silence around it. The body had been speaking for years, but no one translated the language. Once the translation begins, the fear doesn't disappear, but it softens enough to make room for clarity. I have watched women revisit memories of the past decade with new understanding. They remember the first time sleep stopped feeling restorative, the first time stress lingered longer than it used to, the first time they felt emotionally thinner, as if their skin had changed. At the time, each moment felt isolated. Now they see the pattern. This is not hindsight regret, it is recognition. There was a woman named Marianne, 68, who told me she felt foolish for not connecting the dots sooner. She said she thought she was just losing her edge. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed disappointment in herself. She had prided herself on awareness. How had she missed this? What Marianne didn't understand was that these changes are designed to be subtle. The body does not announce transitions with sirens. It whispers. And women, conditioned to endure, are very good at ignoring whispers. After menopause, the female nervous system recalibrates how it handles stress. Cortisol patterns shift. The stress response activates more easily and deactivates more slowly. This is not pathology. It is adaptation in a system that no longer has estrogen's buffering effect. But when women continue to live as if that buffer still exists, stress accumulates invisibly. Marianne's exhaustion was not from doing too much in one moment. It was from recovering too slowly over many years. Once she understood this, she stopped trying to power through days that felt heavy. She began pacing herself without shame. Her energy did not return to its old levels. It became more reliable. That reliability mattered more than intensity ever had. This is the kind of adjustment medicine rarely explains. Not because it's unimportant, but because it doesn't fit into a prescription. The brain is often where women feel these changes most acutely. Attention shifts. Multitasking becomes harder. Emotional reactions feel closer to the surface. Many women worry this means they are becoming unstable or less capable. In reality, the brain is conserving energy, it is narrowing focus, it is prioritizing what matters most. Research has shown that older women often demonstrate stronger emotional regulation than younger adults when stress is not overwhelming them. But regulation looks different now. It requires fewer inputs, less noise, more recovery. When women are taught to keep adding instead of subtracting, regulation fails. I think of a woman named Helen, 71, who described feeling overwhelmed by things she once handled easily. Crowded rooms exhausted her. Conflicting demands left her unsettled for days. She worried she was becoming difficult. What was happening was neurological selectivity. Her brain was no longer willing to process excess stimulation without cost. When she began curating her environment, choosing depth over volume, her sense of stability returned. She did not withdraw from life. She refined it. This is where the myth of decline does real damage. Women are told that narrowing means shrinking. In biology, narrowing often means efficiency. The cardiovascular system follows a similar logic. After 60, blood vessels lose elasticity gradually. The heart becomes more sensitive to internal states like hydration, sleep, and emotion. Many women notice palpitations or breathlessness at rest, which feels counterintuitive and alarming. I have seen women interpret these sensations as proof that something terrible is imminent. I have also seen women ignore them entirely out of fear of being dismissed. Neither response serves them. There was a woman named Patricia, 76, who delayed care because she didn't want to seem dramatic. She told herself everyone her age felt this way. By the time she came in, the issue was no longer subtle. Early understanding could have changed that trajectory. This is why context matters. Knowing what belongs to expected change and what signals deviation allows women to act early without panic. It restores proportion. Another area where misunderstanding causes harm is pain. Joint stiffness, muscle aches, and slower recovery are often dismissed as wear and tear. But pain perception itself changes with age. The nervous system becomes more sensitive. Signals that were once dampened now arrive fully. Pain ignored is not neutral. It trains the nervous system to amplify. Pain understood can often be modulated. I have watched women's suffering decrease simply because they stopped treating pain as an enemy and started treating it as information. There was a woman named Claire, 73, who told me she felt betrayed by her body. She had always been active. Now movement hurt. She assumed this meant she should move less. In reality, she needed to move differently. When we adjusted how she engaged her body, respecting recovery and rhythm, her pain softened. Her trust returned before her strength did. Trust is the quiet theme running through all of this. When women lose trust in their bodies, fear fills the gap. When trust is restored through understanding, fear loses its dominance. This does not make aging easy. It makes it navigable. I want you to hear something important. Feeling off is not a sign you are losing yourself. It is often the first sign that your body is asking for a different relationship, one that honors its current physiology rather than clinging to past expectations. Women who recognize this stop fighting shadows. They stop chasing certainty and rigid rules. They begin to notice patterns in their own lives. They learn which days require gentleness and which can tolerate effort. They become better stewards of their energy. There is a moment, subtle but unmistakable, when a woman realizes she is no longer at war with her own sensations. She may still feel tired. She may still feel pain, but she no longer feels betrayed. That shift changes everything, because once the body is no longer treated as an adversary, it becomes possible to work with it instead of against it, and that collaboration, once it begins, reveals another truth many women were never told, one that reshapes not just how they feel, but how they live with what they feel, And this is where the conversation shifts from explanation to protection. Because once a woman understands what her body is doing, the question is no longer, how do I stop this? It becomes, how do I live well inside it? And that question changes behavior in ways that quietly preserve independence. I have seen this difference play out over and over again. There was a woman named Eleanor, 81, who lived alone in a small apartment she kept immaculate. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if each step had been considered before it was taken. She had heart disease, arthritis, and hearing loss. None of that surprised her. What surprised people was how steady she was, how calm, how present. She told me once, "My body doesn't lie to me anymore. It tells me the truth early." And she listened. Eleanor did not ignore symptoms, and she did not dramatize them. She noticed patterns. She rested when rest was required. She moved when movement felt stabilizing. She sought care early, not because she was afraid, but because she trusted her interpretation of change. That trust did not come from optimism. It came from understanding. This is what controlled agency looks like in later life. Not control in the sense of domination, but control in the sense of orientation. Knowing where you are, knowing what belongs, knowing when to act and when to wait. Women who reach this stage are often misunderstood. They are described as particular, inflexible, set in their ways. What I see instead is precision. Their nervous systems no longer tolerate excess noise, unnecessary urgency, or vague explanations. They have learned, often through discomfort. That confusion is costly. The science supports this lived reality. Older adults who feel oriented in their bodies have fewer falls, better medication adherence, and earlier recognition of true medical issues. Stress-related complications decrease when fear is replaced by context. Sleep improves not because the body is perfect, but because vigilance eases. This is not about doing everything right. It is about doing what aligns with how the body works now. I want to speak directly to something many women feel but rarely say. There is grief in realizing that the body you once inhabited is gone. That grief is real. Pretending otherwise does not make it disappear. It simply drives it underground, where it hardens into resentment or fear. I have watched women soften once they allow themselves to acknowledge that loss without judgment. They stop trying to perform youth. They stop measuring themselves against outdated standards. They begin to inhabit their lives more fully, not because limitations vanish, but because the struggle against them does. This is where dignity emerges. Dignity is not pretending nothing hurts. It is refusing to be defined by pain. It is speaking plainly about what you need without apology. It is understanding that your worth was never tied to how much you could endure. Medicine does not talk about dignity often, because it cannot be quantified. But I have seen it protect women in ways no intervention ever could. Women who respect their bodies seek help sooner. Women who are not ashamed of their limits conserve energy. Women who are not panicked make better decisions under pressure. If you are over 60 and feel off, and if something in what I've said has settled quietly inside you, I want you to understand that this is not a call to fix yourself. It is a call to listen differently. Your body is not asking to be forced back into an earlier version of itself. It is asking to be understood on its own terms. When that understanding takes root, fear loses its grip. Confusion gives way to orientation. And life, while narrower in some ways, becomes deeper in others. I have watched women realize this too late, after years of fighting themselves. I have also watched women realize it in time, and the difference is not dramatic, it is quiet. It shows up in how they move, how they speak, how they rest. And once a woman sees clearly that aging is not a collapse but a refinement, not a failure but a shift toward precision, she carries herself differently through the years that remain, with a steadiness that does not deny vulnerability, but holds it with understanding, because once you see this clearly, you can't unsee it.